Most people believe they are living. They wake up each morning, rush through their routines, chase goals, meet obligations, spend hours distracted, and then collapse into bed at night. To the outside world, it looks like life, busy, active, even successful. But Seneca, the great Stoic philosopher, would call this something else entirely. He would call it existing, not living. Because true living, Seneca reminds us, begins only when you find yourself. And until that moment, you may be moving, you may be doing, but you are not really alive. Pause and ask yourself this. Have you ever felt like life is slipping past you even while you're caught in the middle of it? Days blur into weeks, weeks into months, and suddenly years vanish. You worked hard, you achieved some things, you filled your time, yet a voice deep inside whispers, "I haven't even started living." Seneca knew this feeling well. He looked at Rome, a society overflowing with wealth, entertainment and distractions, and he noticed something troubling. People were busy, but their busyness was empty. They ran after possessions, power or pleasures, but they never stopped long enough to ask who they really were or what they truly wanted. And so they wasted the most precious thing they had. "It is not that we have a short time to live," Seneca wrote, "but that we waste much of it." Those words cut through centuries like a blade. Even in our modern world, filled with glowing screens, endless scrolling and constant notifications, we are still doing what Rome once did, mistaking distraction for living. Think about it. How many people chase careers that drain them, simply because society told them that success means a corner office or a fancy title? How many scroll through social media for hours, comparing themselves to others, trying to prove they are good enough? How many stay in shallow relationships, fearing loneliness more than they fear wasting their lives? Seneca would call these people lost, not because they are weak, but because they have not yet found themselves. Finding yourself, for Seneca, was not about selfish indulgence or chasing endless pleasure. It was about discovering the core of who you are, your values, your principles, the unshakable self that stands when everything else collapses. Until you discover that, you live as a stranger in your own life. And that's the tragedy. You could be alive for 70 years and never truly live a single day. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast ocean. But instead of swimming, you spend your entire life playing in the shallow tide pools. You think you've known the sea, but you've never actually touched the depths. That, Seneca would say, is how most people go through life. They never go deep enough to meet themselves. But why? Why do people avoid finding themselves? Because it is uncomfortable. It requires honesty. It requires silence. It requires stripping away the roles you play for the world. The job title, the achievements, the possessions, and facing the raw self beneath. And most people are afraid of what they will find. It's easier to drown in noise than to face silence. It's easier to chase approval than to confront insecurity. It's easier to keep running than to stop and ask, "Who am I really?" And so, life slips away. Seneca compared this wasted existence to being asleep. He wrote that most people live like dreamers, carried away by illusions. They think they are awake because their eyes are open, but they are actually trapped in a fog. True awakening comes only when you know yourself, when you strip away what doesn't matter and stand firm in what does. Look around at the modern world. Many people are endlessly busy, but very few are truly alive. Some are wealthy, but empty. Some are famous, but deeply insecure. Some are constantly surrounded by people, but profoundly lonely. That's because they never found themselves. They never asked the hard questions. Seneca reminds us, if you don't know yourself, life will control you instead of you controlling it. You'll be at the mercy of your emotions, other people's opinions, or society's expectations. You'll be tossed around like a ship without a captain, always moving but never arriving. But what does it mean then? To live? To really live? It means to act from your own center. It means to know your values so clearly that you cannot be shaken by praise or insult, success or failure. It means that your time, instead of being stolen by decisions, is used with intention. It means that instead of existing as a shadow of other people's expectations, you step into the fullness of who you are. When you live this way, life doesn't feel shorter. It feels infinite. Each moment has weight, because each moment is truly yours. Seneca believed that the tragedy of life is not death, but the fact that most people die without ever having lived. They wait until it is too late to realize that life never truly began for them. They were always waiting for the right time, for retirement, for freedom, for some external milestone. But that day never arrived. And yet, Seneca's wisdom is not meant to depress us. It is meant to wake us. Because the truth is this: you can begin living at any moment. Life can begin today, but only if you dare to find yourself. And that is where the journey begins. And next, we'll explore what it really means to find yourself. According to Seneca, not in vague terms, but in the practical, transformative sense that turns existence into true life. Because once you understand what the self truly is, you will see why Seneca said that this discovery is the very starting line of real living. To find yourself is not to sit alone on a mountain and wait for some mystical revelation. It is not about chasing exotic experiences, traveling the world, or reinventing your image so others see you differently. These may bring excitement for a while, but they do not touch the core. What Seneca meant when he spoke of finding yourself was something far more lasting, far more radical. It is about uncovering the part of you that is steady, the part that is not swayed by the tides of fortune, the part that cannot be stolen by wealth or ruined by loss. To find first is to recognize what is yours in the truest sense, and what never was. Most of what people call the self is only borrowed. Think about it: the opinions you hold, how many of them were given to you by your parents, your culture, or your peers? The ambitions you chase, were they truly born from your soul, or were they planted in you by a society that equates worth with status? The insecurities you carry, did you choose them, or did the world hand them to you when you were too young to resist? When you strip all of that away, what remains? That, Seneca would say, is you. The Stoics believed that your true self is not found in possessions, titles, or even the body, but in your reasoned soul, your mind, your character, your ability to live in harmony with virtue. To find yourself is to uncover this center, to stop living as a puppet pulled by invisible strings, and instead to live from the solid ground of your own nature. Imagine a mirror clouded with dust. No matter how much you stare, you cannot see your reflection clearly. This is how most people live, their true self obscured by desires, fears, and distractions. Finding a fit is like wiping that mirror clean. For the first time, you see yourself as you are. And when you see yourself clearly, you also see the world differently. The insults that once wounded you lose their power. The praise that once intoxicated you becomes less seductive. You no longer chase pleasures simply to fill emptiness, because emptiness itself has vanished. Instead, you act with purpose, guided by principles that no one can take from you. Seneca advised people to spend time in reflection, to examine their own thoughts as carefully as they might examine a friend. He recommended moments of solitude, not as an escape, but as a way to hear the voice within. He urged people to write, to question, to look at their desires with suspicion. Do I really need this, or is it only vanity dressed in necessity? This practice of self-examination was not a luxury. It was survival. Without it, life slips by in a fog of confusion. With it, life sharpens into clarity. Think of how many people spend years climbing ladders, only to discover the ladder was leaning against the wrong wall. They pursued careers that hollowed them out. They entered relationships that strangled their growth. They filled their lives with obligations that mattered to everyone but themselves. And then, when they finally paused, they realized they did not know who they were anymore. Seneca would say this is the result of neglecting the self. If you do not know who you are, the world will decide for you, and the world rarely decides in your favor. But when you find yourself, everything changes. Decisions that once felt impossible become simple, because you know what aligns with your principles and what does not. The anxiety of trying to please everyone fades, because you no longer need everyone's approval. Even suffering becomes lighter, because you realize it cannot touch the core of who you are. To live this way is to carry freedom within you. You could be rich or poor, praised or insulted, surrounded by friends or standing alone, and still remain unshaken. Because the foundation of your life is not built on shifting sand, but on the rock of your own nature. This is why the Stoics practiced daily reflection. At night, Seneca would ask himself, what weakness did I overcome today? What temptation did I resist? Where did I act in line with my values? And where did I fall short? By asking these questions, he was not trying to be perfect. He was trying to be real. He was trying to see himself honestly, so he would not wander through life as a stranger to his own soul. Self-discovery, then, is not a single event. It is not something that happens once and is finished. It is a daily practice, a lifelong journey. Each day, you clear a little more dust from the mirror. Each day, you peel away another layer of illusion. Each day, you come closer to the core. And here lies the great paradox. The more you find yourself, the less you feel the need to prove yourself. The more you know who you are, the less you care about who others think you are. What once felt like chains, the hunger for approval, the fear of rejection, the anxiety of uncertainty suddenly falls away. Think of it like a tree. A tree does not rush to grow faster than others. It does not envy the branches of its neighbor or the flowers of another species. It simply roots itself deeply and grows in accordance with its nature. That is what it means to find yourself. To root yourself so deeply in your own values that you no longer feel the urge to imitate or compete, but to live authentically. And yet, people resist this. They resist silence because it forces them to hear their own thoughts. They resist solitude because it reminds them of their emptiness. They resist reflection because it shows them uncomfortable truths. But the Stoics would argue that facing these only way to live. To avoid them is to live half a life, always fleeing from yourself. Finding yourself, then, is an act of courage. It requires you to step into discomfort. It requires you to stop blaming the world for your unhappiness, and to recognize that peace must be built from within. It requires you to confront the truth, that life is short, and that if you do not claim it as your own, it will be spent for you by others. When you finally accept this, something remarkable happens. You begin to feel lighter. The noise of the world grows quieter. The endless chase slows down. And in that stillness, you begin to taste freedom, the kind of freedom no ruler can take away, no loss can destroy, no fear can silence. This is the gift of finding yourself. Not a new identity to show the world, but a new strength to carry within. When you begin to know yourself, you also begin to understand freedom. Not the kind of freedom politicians talk about, not the kind of freedom that depends on circumstances, but a deeper freedom, the freedom of the mind. Seneca often reminded his students that true freedom is not about doing whatever you want. That kind of so-called freedom is actually a new form of slavery, because it ties you to your desires, and desires never stop demanding more. The person who chases pleasure without restraint is not free. They are chained to their cravings. The person who is obsessed with wealth is not free. They are enslaved to their possessions. The person who depends on praise is not free. They are at the mercy of every stranger's opinion. True freedom comes only when you govern yourself. To find yourself is to place your happiness, your peace, and your sense of worth within your own control. Once you do this, the world can throw storms at you, but it cannot sink you. The voice of society can roar, but it cannot command you. Loss, failure, insult, none of these can dominate your soul. Seneca knew this because he lived it. At one point, he was exiled to the island of Corsica, far from the heart of Rome. Many would have seen this as the end of a life worth living. Stripped of honor, far from influence, cast into isolation. But Seneca turned exile into a school of freedom. He realized that while emperors could control his location, they could not control his mind. His thoughts, his reflections, his character, those remained untouched. And in that discovery, he found the kind of power no emperor could grant or take away. This is the essence of Stoic freedom. If your peace depends on external things, you will always be a slave to them. If your peace depends on yourself, nothing can enslave you. Consider how many people live in quiet chains. Some are trapped in jobs they hate, not because they need them to survive, but because they are terrified of losing status. Some stay in toxic relationships, not because voice holds them there, but because fear of being alone does. Some censor their thoughts, their art, or their voice, not because they believe it is wrong to speak, but because they fear the criticism that might follow. These are invisible prisons, and yet, most people willingly lock themselves inside them every day. Finding yourself breaks those locks. Because once you know who you are, you realize that freedom is not something given by society, it is something claimed by the soul. Imagine a person insulted in public. The ordinary response is anger, shame, defensiveness. But the person who has found themselves does not need to fight for validation. They are not shaken, because their urge does not come from others' mouths. Imagine losing a job. For many, this would feel like the end of everything. Identity, security, value. But the person who has found themselves sees the truth. A job can be taken, but dignity cannot. Money can be lost, but character endures. Seneca often spoke about the power of preparation, reminding himself daily that fortune can take away possessions, status, even life itself. But it cannot touch the mind that is trained in wisdom. That is why self-knowledge is the key to freedom. When you know yourself, you know what is truly yours, and you know what is not. You know that your values, your reason, and your ability to choose virtue remain yours no matter what. This is why the Stoics practiced negative visualization, imagining loss, exile, poverty, or even death. Not to depress themselves, but to remind themselves that freedom lies not in avoiding these things, but in mastering their response to them. A person who has found themselves can walk into the darkest storm and remain calm, because they carry their anchor within. Think of it like this. The world is an ocean. Most people are tossed helplessly by its waves. One moment lifted by success, the next moment drowned by failure. But the person who has found themselves is like a ship with a strong rudder and a steady captain. The waves still rise, the storms still rage, but they steer their course with calm determination. And this freedom is not abstract. You can feel it in small, everyday choices. The freedom to walk away from gossip instead of feeding it. The freedom to refuse a desire that would harm you. The freedom to remain calm when provoked. The freedom to say no when the world pressures you to say yes. These are the moments where freedom becomes real, where self-knowledge translates into power. Seneca believed that without this freedom, life is not truly yours. You become a servant to whatever controls your emotions. Anger makes you its servant. Greed makes you its servant. Fear makes you its servant. But once you find yourself, you reverse the roles. Anger no longer commands you. You command it. Fear no longer drives you. You face it. Desire no longer enslaves you. You discipline it. That is freedom. And there is something else that comes with this freedom. A deep sense of peace. Not the fragile peace that comes when circumstances happen to be in your favor, but the unshakable peace of knowing that your foundation cannot be moved. When you carry this peace, even chaos feels less threatening. Even suffering feels less unbearable. This peace is why Stoicism remains powerful today. The world around us has changed. We no longer walk the marble streets of Rome. We scroll through digital screens and live under different rulers. But the storms of life remain: loss, insult, failure, desire, fear. These remain constant, and the solution remains the same. Find yourself, know yourself, and claim the freedom that comes from within. The person who does this cannot be broken. They may bend, but they do not shatter. They may stumble, but they do not collapse. Because their strength does not come from external scaffolding, but from an inner fortress that no enemy can breach. This is why Seneca could look at his life, with all its exiles and dangers, and still speak of peace. He had found himself, and in finding himself, he had found freedom. There is a moment, subtle yet unmistakable, when life truly begins. It does not come at the age of 18, or 25, or when you graduate, marry, or retire. It does arrive when you hit a milestone society told you to aim for. Life begins the instant you discover yourself, the instant you stop living as a shadow of other people's expectations, and start living in alignment with your own nature. Seneca taught that most of humanity spends its years as if they had an unlimited supply of time. People waste days as though they could always buy more, not realizing that each day is the only currency that can never be replaced. But once you find yourself, time transforms. Every hour feels weighty, every moment feels alive, because you finally understand the value of what you hold. Think of how many years are lost, waiting. People wait for the right time to pursue their dreams, to change their lives, to take care of their souls. They wait until the children are grown, until the career is stable, until retirement, until tomorrow, and tomorrow becomes next year, and next year becomes decades, until finally there is no more time to wait. But the person who has found themselves does not postpone living. They recognize that the only time we are truly given is now. And because they know themselves, they know how to spend it wisely. They do not let others steal their hours with empty demands. They do not bury their days in trivial distractions. They live each moment as if it were a piece of eternity, because in a sense it is. This is why Seneca insisted that life is not short. It feels short only when it is wasted. A person who finds themselves can live a single day more fully than another might live an entire year, because that day is theirs, not borrowed from someone else's script. And something even more powerful happens when life begins in this way. Fear of death fades. Death is terrifying only to those who have not lived. But once you have truly found yourself, once you have tasted what it means to live authentically, you no longer fear the end. You fear only wasting what remains. Seneca's words echo here. Rehearse death. To say this is to rehearse freedom. Finding yourself brings this freedom. It allows you to live in such a way that when the final moment comes, you do not tremble. You do not beg for more time, because you have already lived. You meet death as a natural friend, not an enemy, because you know that life was never measured in years, but in the depth of each lived moment. This is why life begins not at birth, but at awakening. There are many who are alive biologically, but asleep spiritually. They go through the motions. They breathe. They eat. They age. But they never wake up to the truth of who they are. They never touch the essence of living. And so, in a sense, they never really lived. But the one who awakens, the one who finds themselves, begins living no matter their age. A teenager who discovers their true values and commits to them can live more deeply than a 70-year-old who has drifted through decades without self-awareness. A prisoner who realizes their inner freedom can live more fully than a ruler trapped by greed. Life does not measure itself by calendars, but by clarity. Seneca would remind us that fortune is unpredictable. Status comes and goes. Health may weaken. Friends may leave. But once you have found yourself, you carry something untouchable. You carry the power to live each day as if it were enough, to treat time not as an enemy but as a gift, and in that way you transform the ordinary into the eternal. Imagine waking tomorrow with this mindset. You open your eyes, and instead of rushing into distraction, you pause. You ask, what truly matters to me today? And you align your actions with that answer. You no longer say yes to everything that steals your energy. You no longer chase every passing desire. You move with intention, as if every step has weight. That is what it means to live. And the beauty is that this life is available to everyone. You do not need wealth, fame, or perfect circumstances. You do not need permission from the world. All you need is the courage to face yourself and to live according to what you discover. That is the threshold where real living begins. For Seneca, philosophy was not about abstract theories, but about training the soul to live well. To him, finding yourself was not optional. It was the very purpose of philosophy. Because only when you know yourself can you know how to live. Only when you understand your own nature can you align with virtue, the only true good. And only when you align with virtue does life stop feeling like a restless chase and start feeling like peace. This is why his writings still resonate centuries later. The world has changed, but the human struggle remains the same. We are still tempted by distraction. We are still pulled by desire. We are still haunted by the fear of wasting our lives. And his answer remains as clear now as it was in Rome. Find yourself and begin living. Life does not begin when others recognize you. It does not begin when you reach a milestone or when the world applauds. Life begins when you finally look within and say, this is who I am. This is what I stand for. This is how I will live. And once you reach that point, no storm can unmake you. No loss can undo you. No fear can silence you. Because you are no longer a wanderer in your own soul. You have arrived home. That is the freedom Seneca wanted us to see. That is the treasure waiting in every human being. And that is the truth we must remember. Existence alone is not enough. Life begins when you find yourself.